It is 10 o'clock, so thank you all for joining us and welcome to today's webinar. This is the CMS Medicare final ruling deep dive, if you didn't gather that from the message on your screen. So we are going to talk today about some of the questions that not only that we saw as we kind of perused the internet and listened to our agents as they called in to us. We're also going to answer some of the questions that you guys will have as we peruse this webinar today. In case you didn't get the first few moments when we were talking, I am Chelsea Smith. I am a learning and development specialist here at Action Benefits. And joining me today are two of my favorite people working here at Action. We have Randy Lober, our growth marketing manager, and we have Graham Smith, who is our customer development executive manager. So if you guys could go ahead and say hi really quick in whatever order you so choose before I continue on and forget to tell people what's going on.
Hi, glad to be here. Lots of questions over the last few weeks about where things stand with all these interpretations of what CMS is trying to do. So we'll add some clarity when we can, and we'll tell you where there's still some gray areas, which there still is, and go from there, and hopefully answer some additional questions from everyone that's in the webinar today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and good morning. As both Graham and Chelsea said, by the way, no relation between those two. They're just two Smiths we picked up off the street. But yeah, as Graham said, happy to answer any questions you have today or answer them to the best of our ability. There are still a lot of gray areas, and unfortunately, that's just the way rulemaking goes sometimes. So we'll point out what we know, and we'll also point out, I think, what we don't know throughout today's webinar, and hopefully we'll all leave a few steps being closer to experts by the time we hit 11 o'clock this morning.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. So like I said before, our plan is to kind of introduce ourselves, introduce Action Benefits to those of you who might be new to Action Benefits joining us here today. We did, like I said, scour the internet and listen closely to the calls that were coming in to our establishment about the final ruling and answering some of those questions that we already know are going to be asked by the audience. And then we will open it up to a Q&A so you can ask your own questions that might or might not have been addressed by us at this point. But before we get started into that, I want to have a brief commercial who this is brought to you by. So if you haven't gathered that already, we are Action Benefits. We have been doing this for about 35 plus years now, servicing it first in the group space of health insurance. Then we expanded in the last couple of years to include 8 more carriers in the individual and Medicare market. If you are here, you will probably in that individual or Medicare space. So we do have a wonderful 8-person individual team. I sit right by them every single day. So they can answer any questions you might have and give you any supports that you might need. We do have some quoting and enrollment tools, call recording, a vast knowledge library that is maintained by yours truly, and a training calendar that is maintained by Randy and myself that gives you about one course a week on average of some sort of learning that can help support your business. So lots of ways that we are here to help you get the most out of your selling time with your clients. So if you're interested in any of that or partnering with us in any way, go ahead and email us in the email that you will get at the end of this presentation. One more thing before we get into the questions themselves, in case you were curious what the final rule really was. I know that we don't have a ton of newbies in here, but want to touch on it really fast before we get to the questions. What is the CMS final rule? So CMS proposes some rules to tweak the game, essentially. For those of us who play video games, I kind of think of it as patch notes. They kind of come out with an idea, propose them at the beginning of the fall of every year. The public gets about 60 days to comment on what those rules might do or give their opinion on those rules. And then the final rules are I don't want to say set in stone, but they're pretty much set in stone around this time in mid-spring. And then we rinse and repeat every year. So what we're going to talk about today are the rules that have been kind of more solidified and how those rules and how they're worded might affect how you do your business each and every day. So, like I said before, we're going to hop first into the questions that we had prepared for you guys today. So we're going to get right into those. So our first question is for Graham. So Graham, will FMOs still exist after this final rule, and how might their services be changing?
Sure. So there's a few things that the final rule has clarified, and a few other things that it has not clarified. And I would say, and we'll talk a little bit more about the impacts to writing agents' compensation. To me, that's something that in the final rule has been made very clear as to the approach that CMS is taking. What has not been clear is their approach to sort of FMOs and our existence and overrides. It's fairly silent with respect to that, but one thing that it's important to understand is prior to this, it was fairly silent with respect to that. So the past final rules and all of our kind of CMS regulations never really spoke directly to FMOs and paying overrides. There was this administrative bucket that sort of everything sort of fell into, and that was you could pay FMOs, you could pay agents for things like HRAs and marketing reimbursement and all those, and it was just kind of this general bucket. So that has somewhat changed in how CMS is defining compensation specifically for agents. But again, it was fairly silent with respect to FMOs. And as we said before, what happens when CMS is kind of silent on something, or if it's not very clear, is that leaves it up to interpretation, right? And so what carriers will do is say, this is my interpretation. You didn't specifically say we couldn't do it. You didn't specifically say we could do it. So we're going to do this. And then if at some point CMS comes back and says, no, we don't like your interpretation of that, we're going to clarify the regulations. And now you have to do it this way, then carriers will change how they're doing things. And that's sort of the approach with respect to what we're talking about here today in marketing and products, but also with respect to everything, all of the oversight for CMS for all of these health plans, right? So whether it's stars measures or quality or medical management, it's the same kind of process. If it's not clear, they won't clarify it off the record, because if we asked a question and they answered it, that person from CMS would be making a policy decision, and they're never going to do that. They'll say, go read the regs. And we say, well, it isn't clear. And they say, go read the regs. And we say it isn't clear. And so then you just essentially say, this is what we're going to do. And again, if CMS comes back later, clarifies, their regulations, we can change how we're doing things. So as of now, in the way that I think most people are reading this, is there isn't an impact to the existence of FMOs. There isn't anything that says you can't have an FMO and pay an FMO to provide these services, to recruit and train and do all of the things that we do as an FMO. Now, how some of those services might change, again, there's some gray in there. It's pretty clear that from a compensation perspective, you can't pay a writing agent, whether you're an FMO or a carrier, any money anymore on top of what they set as the fair market value. And that fair market value, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about this, is going up $100 per application for new and $50 on renewal. But outside of that, there are other things that FMOs provide, right? So we provide enrolling and quoting tools. Is it money? No. Does it have a value? Yes. Does everything we do have a value? Yes. So that's where there's some gray, is some of those services and technology that we provide to our agents. Again, there's nothing that says we can't do that, but there's also nothing that explicitly says you can do that. So again, that's where the gray. So we make an interpretation. We say our interpretation is we can still give, our quoting and enrollment tool to agents. And if CMS or our carrier partners come back and say, no, you can't do that, we would change course at that point. So that's where some of the gray is. But as of now, again, there isn't anything that explicitly says FMOs are going away.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer, Graham. And the next question, I believe, is yours as well. Yep. How might carrier marketing and lead programs change?
Sure. So there's a couple pieces to this. One goes back to the compensation side of it, right? So as CMS has changed that definition of compensation, marketing is now in that compensation bucket. So in the past, carriers could give FMOs money to give to agents for marketing. They could give agents money directly for marketing as long as they provided receipts and everything. So it was a reimbursement. Even in the past, you theoretically were not allowed to just give agents money. It had to be a reimbursement for a marketing campaign or services, something that you spent it on. So that goes away in the future. So carriers can't give us money to give to you. They can't give you money directly. All those co-op programs that various carriers did, all of that goes away and is taken care of in CMS's eyes by the increase in the comp. Lead programs, there's a couple of implications there too. This again is one that sort of falls into that gray area. So if we give leads to an agent, we're not giving money to an agent. If a carrier gives leads to an agent, it's not money, but there's a value associated with it. So there's some gray as to, can you give agents leads? Again, not totally clear there. The one thing that I think does change on the lead side is the rules around lead generation and getting approval from that person who's the lead to give that lead to someone else. So that is what changes. And that's a significant thing for lead companies. So they can't just, have a website or do digital marketing, generate a lead, and then sell it to whomever. When that lead provides their information, they must explicitly say to that lead company or carrier or FMO or whoever that is, I give you the right to give my information to someone else. And not just to someone else, you also have to say who it is that you're giving it to, which for a lead gen company poses some issues, right? Because you don't know who you're going to sell it to until you sell it. So there's going to be some disruption there, and especially the lead companies are going to be scrambling a little bit. There's also some of the rules around changes to what CMS says is essentially you can't influence by doing anything an agent or someone else to sell a particular product. So, for example, if Blue Cross gave you a lead in the past, that would be like, yeah, you should sell Blue Cross to that client. This is where it gets into that gray, because in CMS's eyes, are you directing that potential client, that beneficiary, to a plan that might not be the best fit for them just because the lead came from Blue Cross? And we're saying, yeah, you should at least try that first. That could be perceived as directing a beneficiary to a program or a benefit design, a carrier that might not be the best fit for them. So again, there's some gray around, how that works, and that in particular with coming from a carrier. If it came from an FMO, we would just say, so whatever, carrier, it doesn't matter to us, because whether it's Humana, whether it's Blue Cross, it doesn't matter. We have contracts with all of them, so we're not directing. But from a carrier's perspective, it could be perceived that way if they give leads to an agent and say, we want you to sell us. So again, some gray around there, but from the marketing side, those marketing dollars go away.
Alrighty, thank you for that clarification. All right. How does agent level compensation change? I believe this one was yours as well, Graham.
Sure. So like I said before, that's the big change is CMS has said all of these other things that you used to reimburse agents for, doing an HRA, AHIP training, any of those kinds of things, marketing dollars, that all becomes part of the compensation definition. So you can't reimburse any more than that. The fair market value, whatever, as you know, that number goes up every year by a few bucks. So whatever that gets set for 2025 plan year, they're essentially adding $100 to that for, new, and then the renewal is 50. So that is how that compensation changes. The other, important thing is there are other organizations out there who have essentially, split overrides with writing agents and writing agencies. You can no longer do that, and you really couldn't in the past. But a lot of times people would say, "Oh, it's marketing reimbursement," even though they didn't ask for any, receipts or anything like that. That is very clear going forward that not only is it a violation of CMS rules, but they specifically called out the anti-kickback statute. So they're putting some legal teeth behind that. So if somebody is paying you as a writing agent or agency money on top of that fair market value, you are 100% putting your business at risk. And the carrier can easily come in and pull your contract. CMS can put the hammer down on the carrier, and they will put the hammer down on agents and agencies. That's the one thing you have to remember. And from my time on the carrier side is, doesn't matter if you're one of their top agents, if CMS says you need to stop this, they will do it because they're not putting all that revenue at risk for one agent. Doesn't matter how much production you do. So yeah, that's in general how those compensation rules are changing.
Not directly related to compensation, but just to add some more context to Graham's point about carriers enforcing compliance, is recall back to last year's final rule where CMS mandated that every carrier puts into effect a compliance oversight panel, no less, that it is specifically designed to oversee the behaviors of their writing agents under them. Right, I imagine many, if not most carriers had that in place before, but that was CMS officially putting that expectation in place, saying, look, we know there's things that probably shouldn't be happening in the market, and this is us putting, enforcement responsibility on you carriers to look out for those things. So we, could very well see more enforcement action either taken from carriers or from CMS for those sorts of behaviors that Graham's talking about here.
Yeah. And I know we had a question there. I can just hit it real quick as we're going. The question was, are we still anticipating get overrides per enrollment after 10/1? We have had no information from any of our carrier partners that any of that override structure is changing. Now, could it? Sure. I think all of the carriers have been very silent. I think they're all seeing who's the first one to flinch and say what they're going to do. But as of this point, we don't anticipate that changing. Again, there was nothing that said specifically in those regs that carriers could not do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Graham. And thank you for answering that question that was in the chat for us. I'm going to go ahead and get us onto the next question, which I also believe is yours. How will lead generation firms be impacted?
Yeah, like I said before, that is a potential significant change for those lead gen companies in that they just have to get approval from that lead to essentially sell that to someone else. And they also have to say who they are going to sell it to. So that makes it really difficult for lead gen companies to do it. Now, will they look for ways around it? Sure, they will. They're not all going to just stop doing Medicare leads. What some of those companies have done in the past is say, well, it's not Medicare Advantage, it's just for a Medicare review, right? We're talking about med sups. And if that person happened to ask about Medicare Advantage, great. Because if you're talking about med sups, none of these rules apply. It's only Medicare Advantage. So that's historically how they've sort of navigated around some of those things. And I would expect to see that, but I would also expect that CMS is going to be watching that very closely.
And I'd say, with the additional work that lead gen firms will have to put in for these leads, you can expect the price of those leads to only go up from here, right? It's a supply and demand issue at that point. That being said, if you are someone in the business of purchasing leads, you can, if a beneficiary is desperate enough to say, yes, please sell my information to someone else, I need help. You can also maybe expect those are maybe higher intent or higher quality leads that you're getting inbound as well. So there's definitely a bit of a cost benefit, analysis to do there. I've also heard from a lot of agents that, they're kind of reading the writing on the wall, seeing that leads are either going to be dry up for them or be pushed out of their reach. And so they're really investing in their own kind of homegrown marketing, whether that's Medicare 101 seminars, so on and so forth. And we're happy to help you put those on and give you some guideposts in implementing those as well.
That was my first kind of thought when I heard this as well, is like, it sounds like that word of mouth and that grassroots marketing is going to be one of the more valuable aspects after these lead generation firms will be impacted by this rule for sure. All right, next question. I believe this was Randy's. How can agents capitalize on the new regulations around supplemental benefits?
I love this question because it is broad and there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. There's actually two big rules or portions of the final rule that deal with supplemental benefits. One of them does not impact your day-to-day as much. One of them has a little more impact on you. First one is CMS made some changes to SSBCIs, or the benefits that you can provide for individual, or plans can provide for individuals with chronic conditions. And really what CMS is doing now is putting the burden of proof on carriers to say, yes, this specific benefit, whether it's a meal plan or post-surgery meals, or an exercise plan, whatever the case might be, is intended, and it will show some improvement with the condition that we're targeting here with these SSBCI benefits. And what they also did was change marketing guidelines, and this is a portion that maybe we'll see, especially again, try to rein in all those commercials and whatnot. They've reined in some of those marketing guidelines to say that SSBCIs can't be marketed as if they're available to everyone. So they have to represent SSBCIs as only available to those with chronic conditions that benefit will target. So there's one aspect, right? And you can capitalize on that by educating folks about SSBCIs and say, hey, you might have heard about that benefit, but you might not be eligible for it because of X, Y, and Z, or you don't have X, Y, and Z. That's certainly one aspect. But the other thing that's kind of exciting from building in a touch point for you throughout the year is that CMS has kind of looked at benefit utilization or supplemental benefit utilization over the course of years. And they're finding that beneficiaries really aren't using dental benefits, vision benefits, hearing benefits, silver sneakers. They're not really seeing the utilization rates that you would want or expect, right, for these, sort of preventive programs. So CMS is recognizing that and saying, hey, there's a lot of taxpayer money going toward funding these benefits. If no one's using them, that's a bit of a problem for us. So mid-year, between June 30th and July 1st of every year, CMS will require every carrier to make personalized outreach to every MA beneficiary, telling them what benefits they haven't used so far, telling them how to use the benefits, what cost share is involved in it, use that benefit, and provide some direction there. So there's good opportunity for you there come July 2nd, right? Once the carrier's obligation is out of the way and they should have notified the beneficiary of that, you can reach out, say, hey, did you get that letter or that call from your carrier? Do you have questions about this benefit? Can I help you access your Silver Sneakers membership, right? Can I put you in touch, help you find a participating gym with some lookup tools? That's a good opportunity to build that touch point with your prospects mid-year, going forward once that requirement goes into effect, and really builds in, like I said, some of that relationship building that's key to maintaining and growing your book of business over as time goes on.
Awesome. Thank you, Randy, for that answer. Let's head to the next question. How will out-of-network cost sharing impact D-SNP beneficiaries? I believe that was yours as well.
Yeah. So not to give away too much of tomorrow's thunder, where we'll talk more about how Medicare and Medicaid interact in the D-SNP space, but in simplest terms, you can think about a D-SNP as sort of a marriage or a blending of both Medicaid and Medicare benefits. And generally speaking, what happens in this space when you're in a PPO D-SNP in particular is that generally for most claims that MAPD or the Medicare plan is going to pick up 80% of the cost. Medicaid, whether it's via the MMCO, the Medicare Managed Case Organization or Managed Care Organization, or the state Medicaid agency, depending on what state you're working in and who administers the benefits, picks up the remaining 20. So Medicare or the MAPD is the primary, MMCO is the secondary. And for an in-network PPO claim on a D-SNP, the 80-20 split stays intact. What happens though is because the D-SNPs are kind of on that MAPD chassis, when someone goes out of network, and as agents, experienced agents, you all know that if you go out of network on a PPO, the carrier doesn't pick up as much of that, right? Cost, their co-insurance drops down to 50%, 40%, whatever the case might be. And that's happening on D-SNPs as well, where the cost share, where the carrier share, they're saying, no, we're only paying 50%, 40% of that if the D-SNP beneficiary goes out of network. And that leaves Medicaid or the state Medicaid agency holding the bag for the remainder of that cost. So you won't see any financial impact to beneficiaries here directly, right? Right now, the ruling here really is to benefit state Medicaid agencies and save them some money, and really put the carriers and Medicare to make them stay in that chief primary payer role. So again, long story short, you're not going to see a lot of out-of-pocket impact immediately to your beneficiaries. The impact here is really behind the scenes and how Medicaid and Medicare are playing together when your D-SNP beneficiaries see someone that is out of network.
Awesome, beautiful. Thank you, Randy, for that answer. All right, let's head to our next question. How will SEP changes and rapid disenrollments affect my book of business? Randy, this is your question as well.
Yeah, so there is a new SEP, or two new SEPs that are introduced with the final rule. One of them is specific only to Part D plans, and it is specific only to those who are dually eligible or otherwise qualified for LIS rather. And with that SEP, they're able to, instead of quarterly, they're able to make a monthly change in their Part D plans. So again, there's opportunities for rapid disenrollment there as they bounce around. So that's something to be mindful of, right? Especially if you're working in the Part D market and you are working with someone that's dually eligible. You want to make sure you're in regular contact with them to make sure that business stays with you, right? And you don't get hit with a clawback for a rapid disenrollment. The second SEP that the final rule creates is done with the aim of helping Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries who are dual eligibles get care from the same parent organization. In other words, CMS really wants beneficiaries to have better aligned care, better integrated care experiences. So they want the MAPD provider and the MMCO, so the Medicare org and the Medicaid org, to generally come from the same place wherever it's possible. So if you have someone that maybe is currently receiving their Medicaid benefits from a McLaren, from a Priority Health, from a UHC here in the state of Michigan, what the new SEP will do is grant them a monthly SEP to move to the same parent organization that is currently providing their Medicaid benefits for a D-SNP plan. So for example, if I currently have my Medicaid benefits administered by Priority Health, but I'm in a D-SNP with McLaren, I would now be entitled to an SEP that would allow me to, enable me to align that under one carrier, in that case with Priority Health.
Awesome, thank you. I think that can be a valuable reason to kind of switch plans like that to make sure you're kind of umbrellaed under one carrier. I liked that rule when it came forward. Okay, so this one, we're back to Graham again. What's the story with D-SNP lookalikes?
So one of the things that was also outlined in the final rule was with respect to D-SNP lookalike plans. So a little bit of history of those plans. So in the early days of D-SNPs, there was a lot of carriers who would create these D-SNP lookalike plans that had benefits that were very similar to a D-SNP, but weren't technically filed as a D-SNP. And a lot of the reason that carriers did that was then they didn't have to essentially comply with all of the stringent things that are in place for carriers if it's a true D-SNP plan. So you have to have something called a model of care that details all of the things that you're going to do for those dual members, for medical management, case management, all of those kinds of things. In addition, there's some network related issues that you had to address as well. So carriers would create these D-SNP lookalikes to kind of like have a product for those people that wasn't really a D-SNP. Now, CMS never really liked those and essentially kind of let it happen for a while because it provided some coverage in areas that there wasn't D-SNPs available. But we've gotten to the point that CMS has said, yeah, if that's your target market, they should be in a D-SNP. So what they're essentially doing is saying those D-SNP lookalike plans can only have a certain percentage of true dual eligibles. And if they don't, they'll get rid of that plan. So if you have someone who's dual eligible, there's D-SNPs in the market, it's really a better fit for them if you put them in a D-SNP. And again, CMS is kind of cracking down on that to eliminate these lookalike plans, especially in those market where there's D-SNPs now. And like I said, they really are enforcing this because they're saying, look, there's a reason why we have all these things in place for D-SNPs. It's because that population requires a higher touch, right? They have lots of comorbidity issues and they need that care that we're saying you have to provide if you have a D-SNP plan in the market. So that's really the change there. Again, it's kind of been an evolution. And so this is CMS putting the hammer down a little bit to say, okay, no more game in the system. If you want to be in this market, file it as a D-SNP.
Awesome, that's cool. I always understood kind of why they were invented in the first place. I never knew why CMS allowed them to continue, so that's interesting. I did not know that. Okay, so next question. With carriers taking on more drug costs in 2025 and beyond, how will MAPD benefits change and what about reimbursement and pricing? I believe this was Graham's question.
Okay, I'll take this one. So there's a lot of things happening this year with respect to changes in reimbursement, pricing, compensation changes. All of these things are hitting at once, right? So there's a lot of pressure on carriers from a pricing perspective, benefit perspective, and they're having to make some pretty difficult decisions with respect to how they're going to structure their benefits for next year, how they're going to price things, what their revenue is going to look like. Are they going to be, making money on these plans, not making money on these plans? Each year, there's something called a TBC limit, a total beneficiary change limit that's applied to every plan. And basically, it's a number that CMS says for this plan design, year over year, you can only change the value of that plan by, and it was generally somewhere between 40 and 60 bucks, right? So every part of that plan has a value. So some things are direct dollar value. So if I say I'm going to give you, 20 bucks back in part B give back, and then I say I'm going to take that away, that's straight up 20 bucks out of that total beneficiary change, right? If it's a change in copay or co-insurance, or I'm changing a supplemental benefit, there's an actuarial value that's assigned to that. And again, whatever that number is, that gets added into that total. And you can only change the benefits in that existing plan by that TBC amount year over year. So we have a lot of things happening this year with changes to reimbursement and pricing from CMS for the carriers, with changes in agent compensation. The agent compensation part of it, I think, is significant. And I've already heard some carriers say they're concerned about it because think about that, their whole book of business, potentially, they could have to add 50 bucks to every enrollment in what they're paying out in agent comp. I can tell you, especially the local and regional plans, we're not spending that kind of money in marketing programs and AHIP renewals and HRAs. So a couple of carriers that I've talked to said they're already concerned about that. So all of these things happening at once, we're going to see a lot of changes for our existing plans. I think what we will also see is service area reductions, plans being terminated because they're just not financially viable in the coming year, because like I got to make more changes than TBC allows me to be viable financially. And so I'm either going to reduce my service area for that, or I'm going to terminate the plan in total. So what that means for agents is you're probably going to be spend a lot more time this year talking to your existing clients about changes to their plans, and should you stay in that plan or should we switch it to something else, than you would in a normal year.
Awesome, Graham. Thank you for that one. That was Graham's last question. So this will be the last question until we get to the open portion of our show. This is Randy's question. And how will fast track appeals for discharge from non-hospital inpatient care help beneficiaries?
This one is actually pretty exciting because it has a real immediate and tangible impact for any of your beneficiaries who find themselves in inpatient care like a SNF. And this is only, I should really emphasize this, this really talks about non-hospital care. So like your SNFs, like hospital at home, those sorts of things. Right now, the state of play is that beneficiaries on original Medicare and beneficiaries on a Medicare Advantage plan or an MAPD have two different sets of appeal rights and two different sets of tracks to appeal that decision whenever care is terminated at that SNF, whenever they're being discharged, not because the patient wants to leave, but because either the insurer or the doctor says it's time for you to go. So right now, the state of play is if a Medicare Advantage plan says, you know what, we're terminating your coverage here in the SNF and we're requiring you to leave that facility, a few things happen. First is that the appeal goes through the regular carrier process, which can be a little bit longer, a little bit, and maybe not as fast tracked as you might see on original Medicare. The other thing that currently happens is that as soon as the beneficiary exits that SNF, right? So as soon as you take a step out that door, you lose your appeal rights on that decision. CMS says that's not quite fair in the final rule here. And rather than requiring beneficiaries to go through the appeal process with the MAPD, the beneficiary can now initiate that appeal with the local QIO or Quality Improvement Organization, Medicare for all intents and purposes, rather than going to the MAPD. That appeal does get fast tracked, just like any other care termination decision at that point. So we'll have a decision much quicker. You're not stuck in some of the carrier bureaucracy you might see around those decisions. And CMS eliminates that loss of rights that happens when you exit the facility. So it might be the case that you could be on an MAPD plan, you do leave the facility, but you win this appeal, right? Because that Medicare or the QIO has reviewed that and says, no, actually, you're entitled to more care here. You can come back here. Because you haven't lost your appeal rights, your beneficiary could re-enter the facility at that point later on. Without having to have, a new medical reason, new diagnosis, and go through all the rigmarole to be admitted to that SNF under the MAPD's guidelines. So really, in short, that does potentially save some people some headache, right? Especially if they don't feel that the decision to terminate care was appropriate by the MAPD. They have some new avenues to fight that going forward.
Awesome, Randy. Thank you so much to Graham and Randy for answering those pre-loaded questions that we had for you guys today. And this portion of our show is going to now be the Q&A portion where you as audience members can ask us some of the questions that you might have had burning in your pocket while you were listening today. So if you could be so kind as to open the Q&A portion of your Zoom webinar, and you will have the opportunity to ask us any question that you would like. And we will get to those questions in the order in which they are asked, and we will remain around to answer those questions that we didn't get to as the hour comes to a close. So whatever time we have for the rest of the hour As long as questions are coming in, we will be here to answer your questions. So please be so kind as to throw those questions into the question and answer portion of your screen, and we will answer them in the order in which they are received.
While they're getting their typing fingers going, I just want to follow up on what Graham said in response to his last question about pricing and benefits and so on and so forth. If you haven't seen it in the news, you being the agent community that's here, some big players in the game say they're expecting to lose membership over plan year 2025. CVS says they're expecting losses of membership of up to 10%, right? Because they know they're cutting benefits. They know their plans won't be as attractive, but they're making those cuts in order to right the financial ship, right? To make sure they're going to be viable going forward. So you're likely going to see significant shifts, if not plan terminations, as Graham said, going forward. And, as those significant players that make those decisions, those big national carriers, if they're expecting to lose membership, they're expecting to some benefit reductions in their plan offerings. There's opportunities there, right, for local carriers to try and outcompete them, or we might see them follow suit. And the tough part is we don't know until people start actually releasing details about their bids and what's been approved. We have heard by and large, though, that where there has been an arms race in recent past to be the first to put your plans on the market, be the first to offer your carrier product rating, and we're seeing those creep into July, sometimes late June, depending on the carrier. We have heard generally those days are going to be pushed back to mid-July, maybe later July. Some carriers even have floated August as a date where they'll start being able to talk product in earnest.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. From a change perspective, carriers, they file everything and they've gone through that process. They're getting information later from CMS. They're going to get that Part D benchmark, which could be very significant, and the change that brings later and later. So like Randy said, in the past, we've gotten, carriers releasing their next year products in mid-July. I would be surprised if we see anything from anyone before August, and it will likely be mid-August. So we're losing about a month of preparation to see what those plans look like. So again, with all the changes happening, that's even less time to figure out what the impacts are going to be to your clients. So everyone's going to be moving, very quickly once those benefits hit the street, which will be later than ever before.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for that. It looks like we do have our first question coming in. Glenn asks, so if I heard all correctly, we're going to be able to lean into actions expertise yet again into the 2025 year to help us navigate this volatile market. So I guess he's trying to give us a quick way to advertise action and how the wonderful things that we do. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, absolutely. But if there's anything you two would like to add to answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
I think you've said it, Chelsea. The answer is yes, we'll be here.
We will.
All right, our next question is from Gustavius. He would like to know, he said, I'm sorry if you covered this already, but I joined late. Could you explain the new compensation rules for PDP and MAPD?
Sure, I could do that quick again. Again, what's going to happen there is the new to Medicare Advantage will go up $100 and the renewal $50, and you will not be able to be reimbursed or paid by an FMO or a carrier for anything else. So all those other reimbursements, marketing, HRAs, AHIP, you name it, all of that goes away, and the fair market value comp will go up to adjust for that.
Okay, our next question is from Terry. Any idea how these changes will impact the companies that advertise on TV and mislead or confuse the Medicare beneficiaries?
I can take that one. Or if you want to jump in, Randy, go ahead.
Well, I think there's an ideal here, Terry, right? Where we would hope that there are some rules here, and they will kind of narrow down and tighten on the screws on some of these misleading ads, especially talking about benefits you're entitled to with SSBCIs and those sorts of things. That's the letter and the spirit of these regulations. But as I read through the final rule and the comments on the proposed rule, CMS does note a lot, and a lot of commenters on the rule notice said, hey, all these rules are well and good, but where's the enforcement action? What are you going to actually do about these things? Do you have people out in the street? Who's watching these ads and paying attention to those sorts of things? And so there's this kind of expectation and reality gap, right? Where CMS is expecting that everyone follow the rules, but there's not as much enforcement teeth as maybe we might like behind some of those rules. So while if we hope and pray that everyone does follow the rules, we know there's always bad actors out there. And unless someone's made an example of, really, I don't think that we'll see some of that change, right? We're going to see some of these bad actors still working on the fringes of the rules, fringes of the law. But the intent, of course, is that the rules and law does something to them. Graham, how does that jive with your reading of that?
Yeah, and there was a lot of changes with respect to this last year. So even, myself watching TV, there was much fewer of those, Joe Namath kind of ads on TV this past AEP than the 2 or 3 before that. And that was because of those changes in regulations that happened in the previous final rule. What may push that even a little further is the changes with leads and that tacit approval that person must give, to sell that lead to someone else, and you have to say who. So that could put a kink in some of those. But some of those TV, ads that you would see, it was really an agency. So they're not just generating leads and selling them. It was a call center agency that was taking it and selling it. And there's always going to be people that, play fast and loose with the rules and try and get away with what they can get away with. That's never going to go away. I think, like Randy said, it's the enforcement on the CMS side. And typically the way that works too is they will go to the carriers, because essentially the carriers are responsible for all of what we do. So CMS looks at an independent agent, at an FMO, at a captive agent, a call center, as essentially a representative of that carrier if they're selling on their behalf. So they're the ones that are responsible to enforce things. And so that's typically the way it happens, is if there are issues, there are complaints filed or whatever, that gets taken to the carrier, who then has to either go to that agent or agency and either put a corrective action plan in place or terminate their appointment, whatever the case may be. That's typically how that works, is they push it back on the carriers.
Awesome, thank you for that. We have a question from Ronald here. He wants to know if the Part D monthly SEP is only prescription drug plan to prescription drug plan.
So this is an area where, as Graham called at the beginning, and I did too, where there is a little bit of gray hiding in here in the rules. If I were to read just the letter of the rule, yes, it's only they only specifically called out prescription drug plans. So they call out those who are duly eligible or otherwise LIS eligible for enrollment into prescription drug plans. Now, if you are dually eligible and maybe you're not in a D-SNP, maybe you're on original Medicare and that's the only way you're taking advantage of this SEP, that's possible. But I can certainly see some interpretation, right, where someone extends that to to apply to a D-SNP and expand that there. Still needs some more clarity and some more guidance from carriers and how they're interpreting that part of the regulation, if I'm being perfectly frank.
Okay, and then we have another question from Ronald. He would like to know, will changes in LIS criteria cause substantial benefit loss to seniors? And will LIS still have a 12-month or through year-end timeframe?
Me?
Oh, go ahead, Randy.
Okay, either one. So as far as LIS criteria, I don't think that's actually a benefit loss, right? Because we see a wider variety of folks who are going to be eligible for LIS under the new rules, up to 150% for full context, under 150% or up to 150% of FPL will be eligible for LIS, and there's a reduction in the tiers of LIS, right? So you're getting increased subsidy and more eligibility for that increased subsidy in that case. This year's rule was silent on the specific timeframes for LIS. So yes, you're either looking at the remainder of the year or the next year, depending on whether you're improved in the first 6 months or the last 6 months of the year for that LIS.
Okay, well, oh, we have another question. Oh no, it moved. Okay, but if they have a D-SNP, they're going to have LIS. If an individual doesn't have LIS, will they still have an SEP to change?
And here, Ryan, again, is where it's muddy. We'll have to see how carriers interpret that particular provision, because I hear you loud and clear about if they have if they have a D-SNP, they'll have LIS. But the rule itself, if we just read the letter of the rule, only specifically calls out PDPs. So we need more guidance from carriers on how they're going to interpret that. I hear exactly what you're saying about if they have D-SNP, they will most likely have an LIS. But if I'm only reading the letter of the rule, that's all it says for it at the moment, for better or worse.
Okay, so it looks like that's all the questions that I have in on my screens. If anyone has any other questions and they were waiting their turn to ask, now is the time. But unless we have anything else to answer, Randy or Graham, is there anything else that you would like to add or say that wasn't covered in any of the questions that we asked today?
I don't think so. Like we said, a lot of changes coming this year, a lot of clarification still to come, or not, as the case may be from CMS. So again, we just move forward the best we can, and if they clarify, they clarify. If they don't, we make an interpretation, and as long as we're consistent in that, they may come back and tell us to do something different, or tell carriers to do something different. So again, this is a thing that we like to do every year, is go through and dig through the, I think it was 1,300 pages of final rule, and see what has the most impact to agents, and relay that information, to you, so you don't have to do that. Another value we provide as your FMO. So for those that work with us, we appreciate your business. For those that don't, give us a call. We'd love to work with you. Again, especially as these rules change for CMS, and the things that we can do, and the value that we provide. We think when it comes to an FMO, we provide a lot of value to our agents, and if compensation was something you were chasing in the past, that goes away. So wouldn't you rather be with someone who could support you and provide the kind of value that we do? We think so. So give us a call. We'd love to work with you.
All right, Randy, unless Randy had anything else to add, yes, that is the end of our show today. So if you'd like to contact us for any reason, I have switched the contact information to reflect on your screen. If you'd like to send us an email at learning@actionbenefits.com or give us a call, you are more than welcome to do so. If you have an account manager, obviously that is your first line of defense, so give him or her a call if you have any questions or needs, or if you think of a question maybe later on and you're like, oh, I wish I would have asked, go ahead and call us or call your account manager. Either one is fine. You are more than welcome. Thank all of you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.